Good morning. So, welcome to the Wilson Center. We're going to get started today. I'm Chris Wilson. I'm the Deputy Director of the Mexico Institute here, and I lead our work on the U.S. Mexico border, among some other things. We're very pleased to be partnering with the Border Trade Alliance once again on our 6th annual Building a Competitive U.S. Mexico Border Conference. I'd say too often the U.S.-Mexico border, especially when viewed from here in Washington or on the national news media, is understood principally as a risk. It's a potential entrance point for a terrorist attack, something that, thank goodness, has never occurred to this date. It's a risk for drug trafficking. It represents a risk in terms of unauthorized immigration. And it is, in a sense, all of those things. It does represent some risks. The U.S.-Mexico border is absolutely an integral part of our homeland defense system, along with intelligence work and international partnerships and good policing across the country and plenty of other pieces of that system. But the border is so much more than that. The border, much more than a risk to me, represents an opportunity. Already, the 4 U.S. and 6 Mexican border states collectively represent the 4th largest economy in the world. Already, we have about $500 billion of U.S.-Mexico trade that crosses the border each year. We have a mix in that special border region of the competitive advantages of the United States and Mexico that make it an especially attractive place for investment and production as a part of the North American manufacturing platform. The border region has traditionally been seen as the periphery, as sort of the edge of the United States, the edge, in many ways, sort of a wild frontier. But I think it's becoming, and in many ways has for a long time already become, the heart and the center of the North American regional economy. And that's what we're trying to highlight by having an event like this and doing it every year. We're trying to make sure that the national conversation, the conversation here in Washington about the border, has people like so many of you that are from the border region who see it up close and personal and know that there's so much opportunity in the border. And yes, some risks, but that we can manage those things with smart policy ideas to enhance security and enhance competitiveness at the same time. And so I want to thank the Border Trade Alliance, thank Paula Avila, Britton Clark, and all of the board members of the BTA for partnering with us on this once again. I'd like to thank our sponsors, CT Strategies, Constellation Brands, and IBC Bank for helping make this event possible. I'd like to recognize any of our special guests in the audience. I know Pattons Miner from our board, Ambassador Roberta Jacobson from our Mexico Institute board are here as well. I know that Ambassador Barcena from the Mexican Embassy is coming upstairs as we speak, actually. And I'd, of course, I want to say that we're very honored to be joined today by Senator John Cornyn of Texas. Senator Cornyn has been a long friend of this conference, actually, has participated in it before, of the Border Trade Alliance and of the Wilson Center. He was here just a couple months ago to talk about U.S.-Mexico security cooperation and what was a fascinating conversation with our director, Jane Harmon. She's in Boston today, but sends her regards, and she tells me that she's still working to get you that credential as an official part of the Wilson Center team. But we're delighted to have someone like you here that has truly demonstrated leadership on U.S.-Mexico relations, on building a competitive border, on all these things that we're here to talk about and focus on today. And so we couldn't be more honored to have you kick off our conference this morning. Thanks very much, Senator.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's good to be back at the Wilson Center. As Chris said, I was here not that long ago talking with Jane Harmon about security challenges. And it seems like when we talk about the border, that seems to dominate our conversations. But I'm here to talk about not just that, but as Paul Harvey, the famous radio personality, used to say, the rest of the story. And we know the security issues certainly steal the headlines, but as a Texan, this is personal because, of course, our relationship with Mexico, as I like to say, we're like an old married couple. We can't get divorced. We got to make it work, and we do that every day to our mutual benefit. So I've long believed in the importance of the strong trading relationship with our southern neighbor because I know of its positive impact on our state, but also on the nation. NAFTA is And our trading relationship in North America with Canada and Mexico is credited with supporting about 5 million American jobs, just the binational trade with Mexico, about another 8 million binational trade with Canada. So it's obviously very, very important. And our total goods and services trade totaled more than $670 billion last year alone. And most of it is because of our proximity to Mexico, between the state of Texas and Mexico, and Mexico's far and away Texas's top trading partner. In 2018, for example, Texas exported $110 billion in goods to Mexico and imported more than $107 billion from that country. Now that trade feeds our local communities and our certainly state and national economy. It's critical to the supply chain for the manufacturing industry that depends on that binational trade. And I think we ought to be looking for ways to do more business, not less business with Mexico. So I appreciate the chance to talk to you about a few of those things today. I want to thank my friends at the Border Trade Alliance and, of course, here at the Wilson Center for hosting us. And I had a chance to visit with some of you yesterday, so it's good to see you again. Well, right now, the thing that is dominating the headlines is the humanitarian crisis that's occurring at the border. That phrase was first coined in 2014 by President Barack Obama, who called the surge of migration coming across the border a humanitarian and security crisis. And it's gotten worse, unfortunately, due to a confluence of circumstances, as you know. Last month, 144,000 people were detained at the southern border. But what's so different is people are simply turning themselves in because, frankly, the coyotes have figured out American law and realize that if you bring unaccompanied children or send unaccompanied children or bring families, that they will successfully navigate our immigration laws and end up being able to stay in the United States because they've simply overwhelmed our capacity to deal with the issue. So I wouldn't be surprised, actually, until some of the more recent developments we've seen, for that number to get even bigger. It was the third month in a row that the number of individuals who came across the border were 6 figures, and it's a trend we haven't experienced since 2006, when the yearly total topped more than 1 million. As you know, there's essentially no net migration from Mexico. This is primarily a Central American phenomenon, although the Rio Grande Valley Border Patrol sector tells me that last year alone they detained people from 140 different countries. So this is well known to the smuggling organizations and who care nothing about the people. They view them merely as a commodity. And of course, many of these criminal organizations are commodity agnostic. They're in it for the money and nothing else. Well, Congress and the administration have grappled with a way to manage this massive influx of migrants, and it's caused some consternation, as you know, about legal trade and travel, and created a lot of challenges. For one thing, because the numbers have simply overwhelmed our capacity, the ports of entry are now primarily ways that children and family units are cared for as they are processed through our system. And of course, Customs and Border Protection officials are now being deployed to hand out juice boxes and diapers as opposed to moving commerce across the border. I understand things have gotten a little bit better since we've surged additional Customs and Border Protection officials to those ports, but what that means is we're taking them from other places around the country, and we're starting to hear from some of our friends on the northern border and at airports around the country and elsewhere that we are that they're experiencing some delays and problems as a result of this reallocation of resources. I remember there was one time when I had this conversation with President Trump, who said, "Well, we're going to shut down the border," and I called the president and I said, "Mr. President, that's going to have a lot of unintended consequences, and please let us come back to you with some more targeted ways to try to get people's attention." Of course, the most important thing that could be done is Congress could actually do its job and act. And indeed, I reached out to my friend and frequent partner on trade and border issues, Henry Cuellar, a Democrat from Laredo, Texas. I call Henry one of the last of the Blue Dog Democrats, but he is a very reasonable, rational, good, patriotic American and a great Texan who I've worked with on a number of these issues. And we've actually introduced legislation called the Humane Act to deal with some of these legal loopholes that are being exploited now by the human smugglers to move people into the United States. The other alternative is what the president resorted to when Congress wouldn't act. He's threatened additional tariffs on Mexico. And I am happy that the relationship with Mexico and the United States is such that they were able to negotiate a result which involves Mexico signing more of its National Guard along the southern Mexican border. Traditionally, this has been viewed as an American problem, and Mexico hasn't viewed this as their problem, much as they have the drug issue, where they view this as being an American problem. If there wasn't a demand, then people wouldn't be selling drugs, which seems like an obvious point, but it's an important one nonetheless. Now I think Mexico views this as a shared problem and challenge, something we need to work on together, and I hope it's with that attitude in mind that we will continue to do so. But the most important legislative thing we can do beyond dealing with this broken asylum system that Henry and I are trying to work on is make sure that the USMCA is confirmed. Obviously, Mexico has taken the first step, which is very encouraging, and I know all of you have followed this very, very closely. There's no question in my mind that NAFTA has been a net benefit to the United States and particularly to Texas. I know those are controversial words in some circles, but I believe it's true, and I believe it's you can demonstrate it in dollars and cents. When I first learned the administration was eyeing NAFTA for some changes, I talked to Ambassador Lighthizer and encouraged him to fix it, not nix it. You remember there was some talk about terminating NAFTA, and then there were questions among lawyers as to whether the president actually had the authority to do that. I came down on the side that he did not, that Congress passed laws, enabling laws that could not be unilaterally withdrawn by the president. But I'm glad we didn't have to confront that issue. I think that would just contribute more chaos and more uncertainty, where we need to have a little less chaos and a little more certainty. But obviously, NAFTA could stand a little update, and the truth is that the energy sector, and particularly the digital economy, were things that really weren't as influential in our shared economy back when NAFTA was first passed as they are today. So after a long year of negotiation by our governments, I was glad that this rebranded agreement was signed by the head of all three countries in November. A couple of months ago, the International Trade Commission publicly released its analysis of the economic impact of the agreement and showed its positive impacts. The ITC concluded that within 6 years of going into effect, the USMCA will raise U.S. gross domestic product by $68 billion and lead to the creation of 176,000 new jobs. We can also expect that more than $33 billion increase in our exports and about $31 billion in increased imports. That's great news for American workers, farmers, ranchers, and businesses that will reap the benefits of this agreement, and I'm eager to get moving on the next step in the process, which is congressional consideration. The Congress recently received something called the Statement of Administrative Action from the Trump administration. That was 3 weeks ago, which in government speak is for the implementing legislation should be coming soon. So we're anxiously awaiting the next step, which is the enabling legislation to come over to us. But as you know, once it does come to Congress under Trade Promotion Authority, Congress can't amend it. So there's not the usual legislative process where people are going to be offering amendments and voting those up or down. It's an up or down vote on the entire agreement. And so it's really important that any negotiations in terms of side agreements and other understandings take place before the enabling legislation comes. And of course, I am encouraged by Speaker Pelosi's being receptive to passing the USMCA. I know she's wants to make sure the House does its due diligence, and as my understanding, she's appointed a team of legislators who was going to primarily speak for the House in terms of those negotiations, but I'm anxious for that to take place soon. The House will vote first, and then given the bill's revenue implications, and then it will come to the Senate. And we'll consider it in the Senate Finance Committee, on which I sit, and then the full Senate will vote. In terms of when you can expect this to happen, that's in the hands of the administration. We could get the implementing bill as early as July the 30th, which would start a 90-day shot clock, or it could come thereafter. My personal preference, and I would encourage you to encourage the administration and the House to not let this linger any longer than necessary. The farther this gets into the re-election cycle and the more this becomes politicized by the presidential campaign and other campaigns, I think that would be to the detriment of considering the USMCA and getting it passed. On Tuesday morning, Ambassador Lighthizer testified in front of the Finance Committee. I asked him the very question, when does the administration plan to submit the implementing bill to Congress? Well, he was studiously vague. He noted his interest in sending the implementing bill and noted the negotiations with House Democrats to advance the agreement. But he didn't give me a time, and I don't actually blame him, but I wanted to ask the question anyway to encourage him and encourage people watching this to get the job done. Because historically speaking, the closer we get to the election, the more challenging it is to get anything passed, and particularly in a divided Congress. So I hope we can get this moving along soon. Now, that's probably one of the most anticipated changes in the trade world, but we are actually working on infrastructure and staffing at our ports of entry, both on the southern border and elsewhere. Texas is home to 29 air, land, and sea ports of entry, more than any other state. And we rely upon the dedicated men and women who serve to both protect us from dangerous and illicit goods and facilitate a legitimate trade and travel. And in recent jobs, as I suggested earlier, that job has gotten nothing but more difficult. Because of the skyrocketing numbers of people crossing the border, as I mentioned, Customs and Border Protection has been forced to reassign custom officers from their routine duties. And at some of the busiest Texas ports, like those in El Paso and Laredo, they've borne the brunt of these reassignments. With fewer customs officers on the job, we began to see lengthy delays at our ports and checkpoints along the entire southern border. In Juarez, which is right across from El Paso, as you know, truckers reported sleeping in their vehicles overnight so they wouldn't lose their place in line. And I was told by one of the car manufacturers that they literally had taken to chartering airplanes to fly from Juarez to El Paso. I think they said it's about an 11-minute flight, just in order to bypass the congestion at the ports of entry. The impact of those delays, of course, reaches far beyond my state and can be felt by the national economies, particularly in manufacturing and agriculture. With an estimated shortage of almost 4,000 CBP officers nationwide, and of course many being reassigned to deal with the current crisis, the impact on the ports will get nothing but worse, especially during the busy summer months. To try to help address, at least on an interim basis, some of these staffing shortages, I introduced a piece of legislation with Senator Gary Peters of Michigan called the Securing American Ports of Entry Act of 2019. That bill would require an additional 600 CBP officers until the agency's staffing needs are met. It also authorizes the hiring of mission support staff and technicians to perform non-law enforcement functions, allowing officers to focus their efforts on law enforcement priorities. It also would require reporting on infrastructure improvements that would enhance our screening capabilities, and I believe it's an entirely feasible goal to meet and would ensure CBP has the staffing, the resources, and infrastructure needed to keep our ports safe and running efficiently. This bill was passed unanimously yesterday by the Homeland Security Committee in the Senate, and I hope we can bring it up for full consideration by the Senate soon. Both the USMCA and more effective and efficient ports are critical to maintaining a competitive and smart border. But without action to get to the bottom of what has led to many of these challenges, we'll continue to find ourselves in a battle of wills and battle of physical versus economic security. My point is here today, we don't have to pick between those. We can have both, and we need to focus on both, physical and economic security. It's not a zero-sum game, By making targeted reforms, we can address the flow of migrants coming across the border without compromising our economic security. I have the privilege of chairing the Senate Judiciary Committee on Border Security and Immigration, and we recently heard from Border Patrol Chief Carla Provost. She compared the current situation to holding a bucket under the faucet. She said, it doesn't matter how many buckets you have if you can't turn off the spigot. And that's why I introduced the legislation I mentioned earlier to you, the Humane Act with Congressman Cleburne. The main problems that need to be addressed by the Humane Act are the fact that the so-called Flores Agreement prescribes how unaccompanied children should be handled at the border. And obviously we want to make sure we treat all of those children in a compassionate and a humane way. But the agreement had also been extended in a way that made it almost impossible to detain families that come across with children. And the problem is, any of you who are involved in law enforcement know, you can pass all the laws you want, but unless there's some deterrent aspect to the law, people are going to continue to come, and that's exactly what has happened. So essentially, under the current status of the law, children have been turned into a get-out-of-jail-free card for some migrants, and in fact, there have been documented cases of people claiming children that were not their biological children, and the Border Patrol is literally taken to perform DNA tests to make sure that children aren't being exploited. A recent Washington Post story quoted a man as saying, "That's the thing everyone knows now. If you go, you need to bring a child with you." So our bill would clarify that the Flores applies only to unaccompanied children, not to family units, and it would help eliminate that pull factor and prevent single adults from exploiting children to gain entry to the United States. So in conclusion, let me just say, as our country struggles to deal with this humanitarian crisis and we fight to prevent it from turning into an economic crisis, the discussions you're having today could not be more timely. So I appreciate the chance to come back to the Wilson Center and join you today to share some of my thoughts. And I'd like to welcome Chris back to the stage, and I understand he has a few questions for me. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Senator. Actually, we're going to turn to the audience, if that's okay, to see if you have a question or two. I think we have a couple of microphones around. Is somebody... Oscar, could you help with the microphones? And please just raise your hand if you have a question. Please introduce yourself and keep it brief so that we really just have time for one or two questions, but we'll go to Sam Vale over here. Yeah. Please let us get you the microphone.
Oh, there you go, Sam.
Sam Bale with Public Policy, the Border Trade Alliance. Senator, we appreciate very much what you do, but I would like to get some clarification when you talk about Port Improvements Acts. Is there any room in there for what really could get the funds going faster, which would be public-private partnerships that would allow big-ticket items to ultimately be reimbursed by the government, but over a period of time that, not like capital lease, but more of an operational lease, 5-10 years at a time. That way you get a lot more money for the buck. You can get more of the non-intrusive stuff in. So we're very curious about that. There seems to be some questions on how that could operate, but we would certainly encourage you and your staff to do something in that area.
Well, Sam, my understanding is, a few years ago we passed a pilot project that allowed for the use of public-private partnerships. I believe you and the Border Trade Alliance were instrumental in convincing me that we needed to do that. That now has been expanded and made permanent. And so I believe there is the law does provide for an ability to do that. To the extent that that's not being implemented or being used as widely as it could be or should be, we're happy to work with you and try to figure that out. But I do believe the legal authority is there today to do that, and I agree with you. That's really important because federal dollars, tax dollars are hard to come by, and if we can continue to work with the border communities and public-private partnerships, I think that's the way to go.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. I want to ask a second question. It's on
just for
side
the
agreements. I would like to get Senator to respond to the importance of side agreements, having done it in NAFTA. Doesn't that give us more flexibility going forward without having to have everything worked out on that day?
Yeah, my understanding is there can be and probably will be some side agreements because of the fact that we can't amend the agreement itself because of Trade Promotion Authority rules. That side agreements will be probably necessary, I think, just from a political standpoint, because they're going to be people who want some changes in return for their vote, and we need their votes in order to get things passed. So I would expect that to be the case.
We'll take one last question from Pattons Miner here in the front row from Kansas City Southern, if we could get him a microphone.
Yes, Senator, I'm Pattons Miner from Kansas City Southern. You encourage us to do what we can to put pressure on Congress to move this through.
I'd call it encouragement.
Encouragement. And a couple weeks ago, I was here and called on 12 Democratic congressmen, including Congressman Cleburne. And are there specific actions? I mean, how can we get the most bang for our buck in the next 30 to 60 days to?
Well, actually, as I think I indicated, I've been encouraged by Speaker Pelosi's response, and Ambassador Lighthizer has told me he's had extensive conversations with her and the Democratic caucus. But I think the rank and file members in the House are going to be waiting for a signal from her that now it's time to act. And actually, she's appointed a group of House members to begin to process the legislation. I think she's doing her own due diligence to find out sort of what her members' concerns are and be, like any leader in a legislative body, try to be responsive to that and shape the battlefield, so to speak, in a way that will guarantee success. So I think just continuing to encourage the Speaker and Democratic leadership in the House, since it has to start in the House, is to me the most important thing you could probably do.
Senator, thank you so much for helping kick off our event today. Really appreciate you.